Hi, friends. This is now another episode of the Dapr in Action series. My name is Rodrigo, and today we're going to see the workflows building block. So, this is helpful when you are trying to execute long running processes. Um, Actually, if you happen to be an Azure Functions developer, this workflows component is actually very similar to the one that we use in Azure Durable Functions. In other words, you can transfer your existing knowledge in Azure Durable Functions and build long-running processes in Dapr by using this building block. Remember, I use component and building block interchangeably sometimes, but I'm referring to the feature that allows us to execute long-running processes here in Dapr. So that is actually what I'm going to do today. I'm going to show you the workflow documentation. You can navigate to docs.dapr.io and then find the workflow overview. And there you can find, of course, all the existing documentation about this fantastic building block. So, what are some of the use cases for executing workflows? I don't know. Maybe you are processing data. Maybe you have this process in your business or company that is required to execute different services. So instead of calling each service separately and synchronously, you can always create this kind of objects in your application. And other use cases, I don't know, maybe you want to create a report, or you want to process data, or you want to create agentic applications, right? By using a large language model and so on, you can implement those capabilities by using the workflow building block. So it's important to highlight the different patterns that you can implement by using this feature. This is actually the one that I'm going to use today, task chaining or activity chaining, meaning that you can execute an activity, say a process, and then you wait for the response, and then you use that output as the input for other activity, and so on. But of course, there are other patterns such as the fan out, fan in. This is when you want to execute different things at the same time in parallel. Async HTTP APIs, if you want to call, maybe you want to call even external APIs, and monitor as well, and some others. As I was mentioning before, this is very similar to the ones that we use in durable functions. So we have function chaining. This is the task chaining that I was talking about, and fan out, fan in, async HTTP API. So you can easily see how you can transfer your existing knowledge to Dapr. Perfect. So let's jump right in. Let's create a new application. My intention here is to create a workflow initially with a single activity. I want to make it simple to understand, and then we can add additional activities, and let's see how it goes. Okay. So first you have this existing folder. This is actually empty right now. So let's create a new web API, regular stuff, Dapr in action dot, let's name it, I don't know, workflows or workflow service, right? And use controllers, just a regular web API. And this is the project where I'm gonna add the workflows SDK, which happens to be a different SDK. So I'm not gonna reference Dapr.ASP.NET Core, but instead Dapr.workflow. So let's do this. Before I go further, let's create another one. Let's name it Service A. So I have two projects. Let's create a new solution, .NET new solution, and Dapr in action workflows. Oh, workflows with the correct spelling. And let's remove this one. Okay, cool. And then .NET solution, add service A, and the other one, which is workflow service, right? So Dapr in action workflows.sln, this is the one that I want to, open here in Visual Studio. But of course, you can follow the same code by using Visual Studio Code if you happen to love Visual Studio Code more than 2022, which is not my case. I truly love 2022. So yeah, this is a regular template. We have that weather forecast thingy. So here, let's add a new NuGet package and let's search for Dapr.workflow. This is the name, okay? At the time of this recording, the latest one is 1.14, as you can see here on the screen. But of course, the Dapr team is working in version 1.15 nowadays. Anyway, let's use 1.14 and let's install this NuGet package in this project. Okay, so now let's do the following. I want to create a workflow with a single activity. In workflows, you have inputs, of course, and then you send out an output, right? So you have inputs and outputs. That is actually it. So let's create a new activity. Let's name it my activity or first activity. So here in Dapr, the base class that you need to inherit from is workflow activity. Okay, so that's why you need the SDK. So this is Dapr.workflow activity, and you can see this is a generic class that takes two types. The first one is about the input that you want to send to the activity, and the other one, of course, is about the output. So let's say that I want to process a string. I don't want to make it super, difficult in this session. Of course, in the real world, you maybe want to send, I don't know, a complex class or a structure or what have you, right? A record or something. But in this case, I just want to send a string and I want to output the string, right? I want to make it simple. Now, this is a base class, and if we press F12, you can see this is an abstract class that implements the iWorkflow activity interface, and actually you need to implement run async. In other words, you need to implement this abstract class, run async, you're receiving this context, and you're receiving the input, right? So I don't know, maybe I just want to return the string that I'm receiving as the, I don't know, the uppercase version of that string. In other words, let's return input to upper. And of course, task from result and input to upper, right? So this is the first activity. I'm receiving whatever string I'm passing to the activity, and the activity itself is going to return the uppercase version of this string, right? Quite easy thing to understand here. Okay, so this is the first activity, the first and only activity that I want to have in this first workflow. And now we need to create the workflow itself. So those activity objects are the one that are going to have the logic, okay? And the workflow object is going to orchestrate the entire process, the entire workflow, right? Hence the name. So fantastic. Let's create a new workflow. Let's name it my workflow. I hope you can see my screen and the font size correctly. Let's increase it a little bit. And so my workflow, and let's inherit from workflow. This is another base class that we can find in Dapr.workflow. And similarly to what we had before, you can specify the input type and then the output type. Again, it depends on the requirements of your the application that you're building. In this case, I just want to process some strings. So I'm gonna delete this. Copilot here is hallucinating. Workflow. This is the base class, input string, output string, and again, I need to implement this abstract class, which is quite similar to the one that we had before. And now we're ready to execute the activities. So I'm gonna use context and then call activity, right? Very, very easy thing to understand here. I think the API is quite fresh and clean. So that's the thing that you need to do here. Activity, call activity async, and let's do this, call activity async, and we have two versions, input and output, and then the name of the activity, which is first activity, and then I pass input. So this is one way, this is another way, okay? Actually, I think the generic version only supports one type, which is the input value. Anyway, I'm gonna use this one. And here, I'm just, using Copilot and using this first activity string. Of course, you can use name of instead. Anyway, let's, result equals await, override async, and I'm receiving the result here. Let's see what's going on. Cannot sign void. This is not returning anything. Okay, no result here, just await. And what's going on? So call activity, is this just returning task? Let's see if this other one has something interesting. So string, and yeah, I think this one is better. So first activity, and then input, bar result, await. I think this other overload is fine when you just want to fire and forget. In this case, I just want to return the value. And I think we're fine. Return result, and just as simple as that. I'm calling the activity, I'm sending the input, I'm receiving the output, and I'm returning this as part of my result. So as you can see here, it's easy to understand how you can chain things together, since you can wait for an activity, wait for the response, and then use that output as the input for another one. In other words, I can use context.callActivityAsync and to call another different activity. So, but yeah, let's keep it simple right now. And I think we're ready to register the activity. Okay, you define those classes and you define the workflow itself. But of course, you need to register if you happen to be using .NET, you need to register those activities and the workflow here in program.cs. So builder.services, and let's see what we have here. Add workflow. Do we have something about workflows? Add workflow. Add workflow. I think this is it. This is the name that I was looking for, or Dapr workflow. Using Dapr dot workflow, and let's see what we have here. Add Dapr workflow. Yes, I was right. Add Dapr workflow. So my IntelliSense is not working perfectly today. Anyway, you can pass this action, which is the object that we use for registering the activities and the workflow itself. So options, and you can see that we have register activity and register workflow. So let's register the activity, first activity, and I think that's it. Register activity, T activity. I think this is the overload. Yes. Register activity, as simple as that. We have to be sure to call activity return type. I think, yes, Suleiman. Yes, call activity return type. Yes, I was using these other word, the other overload. The other one is for firing and forget. Context, call activity async. If you use this one, this particular one is just returning a task. So just await, and that's it. When you're processing something and you're not expecting a result, in this case, I'm using this other overload where you specify the type, and of course, you can use the result here and save it in the variable and so on. Fantastic. So we're registering the activity, and now we need to register the workflow itself. So very similar to what happened here. Just register workflow and then use this generic version of the method and my workflow. And I think that's it. Yes, that's it. Fantastic. Now, the workflow is registered, the activity is registered. We need to use the workflow somewhere. So I'm gonna create a new task action result method named start, since this is the one that I want to use for starting the workflow. So how in the world I can do that? So I think we need to inject the Dapr client object, just like we been doing this series. In other words, let's see if I can Dapr client right here, Dapr client, and then use Dapr client here. And we have start workflow async. This is the method for starting and executing the workflow. Okay, so you just inject Dapr client. So you need to specify workflow component. So this is Dapr. It has to be Dapr, and workflow name, my workflow. This is correct. And then you pass an instance ID. An instance ID. So this is for you to specify. This is for you to, to create and to register somewhere. In other words, you need to pass a string that identifies and uniquely identifies this workflow, because you can run the same workflow many times. So I think GUID, not GUID, and then to string, and I think that's it, right? Since if you happen to be using other, I don't know, ID strategies such as, I don't know, consecutive numbers, or I don't know, I think this is better. So I'm going to use the GUID, and then I need to pass the input. This is a string that I want to use for sending to the workflow, right? So HTTP post, and let's receive data. And let's use the query string instead of using a body and defining a model and so on. I think this is fine. So data, and wait. So you can see that I'm receiving this error, but I think nowadays is safe to just suppress this this error. Okay, and this is because the workflow component, sorry, the workflow building block was in alpha state. Let's go back to the documentation and overview. Dapr workflow is currently in beta. I think that is the reason why. Okay, it's in beta, and I believe in the next version of Dapr, this is going to be released as a GA component. But of course, let's wait and see, and let's obtain the result. And I think that's it. Return OK result, and I'm receiving the result. Just take into account that you're receiving, this is not a string result, okay? You're returning here start workflow response. So this is the response. This is the place where the engine returns the information about the workflow and its state. Okay. So I believe this is very helpful. Let's see how it goes. And I think we're ready to start the workflow. We created activity, we created the workflow, we registered activity in the workflow, and then we're starting the workflow and returning the result. Okay. So let's jump right in right here to this folder, and let's start the Dapr sidecar. Okay. So Dapr run, you know the drill, right? Application ID, workflow, or my workflow, or what have you. And then Dapr HTTP port, let's use 55,000, and a port 5500. And before I continue, let me show you one additional thing that you have to be careful about. So let's navigate to the home folder and then .dapr. Remember that this is a place where the default components are installed when you Dapr init. So if I navigate to components, I can find the state store. So the thing about the workflow engine is that it needs a state store for storing the workflow state, right? So this is gonna use the state store that is right here. Of course, you can specify other state stores. In this case, I'm using Redis, okay? And I happen to be executing Docker desktop in this computer. right here. Okay. So this is important. This parameter that you're passing to the Redis state store, and actually you need to pass to other kind of state stores for using workflows. And this is because underneath it all, the workflow engine is using the actor state store. I mean, you have to enable this, and the parameter name is actor state store, and you have to specify the value as true. In other words, you need to enable this. Okay. Luckily, this was enabled before. I don't recall enabling this in my computer. So I believe back in the day, I mean, back, I don't know, 2 or 3 months ago, when I Dapr init in this computer, this value was set. So anyway, you have to have it. Let's return Dapr in action 10, and then workflow service, and Dapr run, Dapr HTTP port, a port, and I want to use the default components. So that's why I'm not gonna pass resources path or components path. I just wanna use .NET and then URLs and specify HTTP plus 5500, because I want to match those app port and the .NET application port, of course. And let's execute this. So app process exited, .NET URLs. You misspelled a built-in .NET command. Did I? Yes, .NET run. .NET run, this is the command, URLs, and we're ready to rumble. Okay, so yes, this is running. This is running, okay? The engine is running. But of course, the workflow itself is not running at all. I need to execute it. So let's go back here to Visual Studio and let's, I don't know, let's set some breakpoints here and here as well. And I want to attach to the Dapr in action workflow service process that is right here, because I want to debug this application. I want to show you exactly what's going on. And I think that is it. Let's use Postman, or you can use curl, or you can just use this HTTP file. Let's use post to, is that the name? Weather forecast? Oh my God. Anyway, I didn't change the name, so weather forecast is fine. 5500 post, and remember that I'm using this query string. So data, I don't know, hello from Dapr in action. Dapr in action. Is this escaping the string? No, this is not escaping the string. So blank space, I think is that percentage 20? I think so, right? Hello from Dapr in action. Okay, cool. Send request. So we are sending the request. This is starting the workflow, and it's returning. And of course, the workflow is being called, and the workflow itself is executing the activity. And this is just returning the uppercase version of that string. Remember, this is the place where you implement the logic that you want to have in your solution. I'm just returning upper. And I think that's it. That's it. This is executing. And this is just returning an instance ID. Okay? This is the instance ID of the workflow that we're executing. So, of course, you need another endpoint for inspecting the status of the workflow. So let's do that. Let's stop this. Let's go back here and end the execution. And you know what? I really, really hate weather forecast, blah, blah, blah. Let's change it to workflows controller. And let's get rid of weather forecast. Anyway, workflows controller. Of course, I need to change this, right? Let's change workflows. Okay, cool. Okay, let's go back to the controller. As I was saying, you need to implement another endpoint for inspecting the status of the workflow. So public async task. You know the drill. Action result. Let's name it get or get status or something. This is going to be an HTTP get method. So I need to pass the instance ID, right? I think that is it. GUID instance ID and from query. And I want to use that instance ID here, get workflow async. So in this case, you just pass the instance ID to string, and then workflow component. It's going to be Dapr. And if you happen to have a cancellation token, you can pass it here. But I'm not using the cancellation token. So let's await the result. Oh, bar result. Await just like this, right? And return okay result. So this API is currently not stable. I think this is the same thing as before. So let's suppress this right here. Of course, you can use that suppression in the CSproj file instead. But that's a .NET thing. Get workflow, I'm returning the result. Get workflow response. And I think we have different things that we can inspect. Last updated ad, because remember, those workflows can be running for a long time. So last updated ad, properties, instance ID, and so on. Let's return the entire object just to see what's going on. And so let's remove those breakpoints. And let's run this project again. Okay, perfect. Let's go back to the HTTP file. Let's start a new workflow. This is a new instance ID. And I can actually go ahead and create a new request here. Get /workflows. I don't need this query string. I need instance ID. And let's pass this. Of course, you can use this other syntax. Dapr in action workflow service, blah, blah, blah. You can connect the response from the previous request as the input in this query string. But I'm just going to pass this value directly and send the request. And this is returning. Let's increase the size. So this is returning the workflow name, the instance ID, nothing new. Workflow component name, Dapr. Created ad, last updated ad. I think those two values are UTC values. Runtime status. I believe this is we need to verify in the documentation, but I think it's like completed or something because the activity executed and finished already. So the input was hello from Dapr in action, no custom status, and then the output is hello from Dapr in action in uppercase, right? So this is great. You can easily see how you can create additional activities, right? So in the workflow itself, you're chaining those values. Remember, this is the pattern that I'm using today, which is task chaining. But of course, you can use other patterns such as the fan out, fan in, async, HTTP APIs, monitor, external system interaction, and you can actually add a human in the loop kind of process, meaning that I don't know, maybe a person needs to, verify, needs to update something, needs to check something, needs to, I don't know, approve um, the process that you're building or something, so you can send an email or a notification, and then that person can execute the thing that is expecting, the workflow is expecting to continue. Okay, so again, it depends. It depends on what you're trying to execute. So what happens when you have in your workflow one activity and that activity is related to a service in your solution? In other words, let's say that I have here another activity. Let's name it second activity. And of course, I need to stop this. And workflow activity, string to string, doesn't matter. So let's say that you want to, I don't know, maybe this service A thing is running, and you can use the service to service invocation building block. So how can you do that? I think here, oh, sorry about that. Let's return. Let's see what we have in context. Do we have the client? No, we don't have anything additional. So here you can inject Dapr client and use Dapr client, invoke. Remember? Do you remember that? So that was one of the first building blocks that we saw in this series. So you can use invoke method for invoking something that is running in service A that is exposing, that service A is exposing. Make sense? Right? So here the technique is just inject the Dapr client and then pass the input that you want to send to that endpoint. And I think that's it. So first activity, I mean, not first activity, second activity, those two are not different than, what happened here? I'm sorry. Second activity was the one that I wanted to update. Anyway, first activity and second activity are not different than any other, service or application in Dapr. So you can inject the Dapr client and then use invoke method, or you can use any of the other methods that the SDK is exposing. Let's see, Dapr client, invoke method, right? And yeah, you pass the, I don't know, you can say this is a HTTP request, this is a GET, and then the app ID. It has to be the app ID that you specify when you run the service, and then the method name and so on. Again, I'm not going to do this, but you can easily see how you can connect the workflow thing and the activity itself with the service-to-service invocation feature. And I'm not going to do that today because of time constraints. But again, you can do that as a homework for you, okay? Quite easy thing to do and understand. So I think the main thing about the workflow building block is that the engine is being managed by Dapr itself, and you just specify the activities and orchestrate those activities, and the storage is going to be managed by Dapr. And I think that's it. I think this is fantastic. So I'm not going to use service A today, but of course, let's, I don't know, you can return something about this other input in this second activity. Let's say that you're processing, I don't know, let's return second activity just like this. And, you know, I just want to change the output here. Okay. And remember, in tasks chaining, this is a place where you wait for the first activity and then await context, call activity, string, second activity, and pass the result. Actually, Copilot here is right. You can pass the output from the first activity to the second activity, and you're chaining those tasks together. Okay, makes sense? Awesome. I think that's it. I think you just watched the main things and the main traits about the workflow building block. Of course, there are other interesting things about this, and I totally recommend you go to the official documentation and understand the different patterns and the different parameters that you can use. And otherwise, this is it. This is the gist of Dapr workflows. And so thank you for your time, friends. And I suggest you go back in time and watch the other sessions that we have here in C# TV. This is session 10. I'm Rodrigo, and see you next time.